In the last 10 years, $4 trillion was added to our debt just for the wars that we have been fighting. You know, after 9/11, of course, they passed the Patriot Act, and that was supposed to, I don't know how that was supposed to solve the problems by punishing the American people. By undermining your Fourth Amendment rights, how is that going to punish the people who did those deeds to us? At the same time, we went involved in wars. We didn't really go after bin Laden immediately. What we did was we went into a war that they wanted to fight for 10 years. We went into Iraq, and Iraq, of course, had nothing to do with 9/11. There was no Al-Qaeda there, no weapons of mass destruction. And so we go in there, and then, of course, this constant war in Afghanistan. But during this period of time, there's nearly 9,000 Americans have died. This counts the contract workers. There are 40-some thousand who have come back with severe injuries, hundreds of thousands who are now currently suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome, as well as brain injuries and amputations. It's a real, real tragedy of what's happening. So if we're going to pay back and penalize the people who did that harm to us on 9/11, how much more death and destruction do we have to put on ourselves for those happenings? It doesn't solve our problems. And killing a lot more civilians, invading more countries, all that does is stir up more hatred toward us. We have to understand that it wasn't I who invented the term blowback. It was defined by our CIA. And it was well known in the Department of Defense, as many other scholars, that one of the main reasons why they wanted to come over here and do us harm, the main purpose and the main concern they had was occupation. And that is the reason I would say, yes, we should occupy the United States of America and not the rest of the world. So the change in the foreign policy is obviously very vital, not only because it would make us safer, it would also save us a lot of money, and it is under the conditions of war that people are more willing to give up their liberties. So they say, well, you know, you've heard it, I'm sure. I've heard it too many times, that right after 9/11, well, yeah, I know, if they have the Patriot Act, we have to give up some of our freedoms, but don't we have to give up our freedoms to be safe? That is absolutely right. There is never a time when a free people should ever compromise and say that you have to sacrifice liberty for safety, because it's not true, and we never should concede that principle. That's right. But we have conceded too much in the time of war, and just look at what's happening now. The president, by executive order, announced that he can kill American citizens. The Congress actually passed the law, the National Defense Authorization Act, which allows the military to arrest American citizens, put them in prison, no attorneys, secret prisons indefinitely. We can't allow this to stand. We as a people should not tolerate what we see on TV and the pictures of the groping and the x-ray and the abuse that we all go through at the airports. We need to give up on that and not tolerate it. But safety and security does drive a lot of people into giving up to sacrifice. Some people want physical safety, some other people want economic safety. Now, I don't know of anybody, I've never met even those in Washington, and there's plenty there that are very controversial, but especially most of them, have good intentions on wanting to help people, make sure that they can be taken care of. But if you study history and look at the more socialistic and the more authoritarian a society, the more poor people there are, and the worse the environment is taken care of with bigger and bigger government. But guess what? The societies who've had the maximum amount of freedom have had the maximum amount of prosperity, the largest middle class, and the most personal liberty. That was United States. It used to be that way, and it isn't that way now, and that should be our goal. The maximum amount of prosperity for the maximum number of people, no special benefits and bailouts for the super rich. And yet today, this is the crisis of what we feel, because our middle class is shrinking. The people on fixed incomes are getting poorer. Our standard of living has gone down for more than 10 years. People are not getting wealthier. There have been no significant improvement in jobs, in real jobs, in these past 10 years. So although most people recognize our crisis economically occurred in the last 4 or 5 years, actually I believe it's been going on since the year 2000. If you look at the statistics, it's been going down here. Real wages aren't going up, real jobs are going down, and people are struggling. Debt is the problem. We have come to believe, because we've been taught so long at our universities, that spending and inflating the currency is a good thing for the economy. It isn't. It's old-fashioned work and efforts and savings that has to make a country wealthy. Now, the government does have a responsibility for that, and that is to protect those principles. That is that they're not responsible for creating jobs and redistributing wealth, but they should have a lot to say about it, like protecting contracts, not destroying contracts and interfering and breaking up contracts. Live by the laws of the marketplace. They're not supposed to be able to inflate the currency and destroy the currency, and they're not supposed to over-regulate us to death and not to overtax us. So if you want an incentive system to work where you can go out and you're rewarded for hard work and effort and savings, means you have to recognize once again the basic principles of liberty. Our lives come from a creator or to us in a natural way. Our liberties come to us in the same way, and therefore it should follow that the fruits of our labors are ours and not the government's. Now, the way so many of these things start was only be a little bit, and we're going to soak the rich. That's how the income tax started. But it's the principle that is wrong. If the government can say that we're going to only tax you 1%, they're establishing the principle that they have control over 100% because they're deciding what percent you get to keep. So therefore, we need to reestablish the principle that what you earn and what is yours and not the government's to be taken from you. That's where productivity comes from, and yet so many people get drifted into this thing, well, there's some people who are going to be poor and we have to help them. But the whole problem there is this entitlement notion is not a right. Because some people come along and say, oh, well, I'm entitled to a job, a free house, a free education, free medical care. Well, you're not entitled to it because somebody has to take it from somebody else. And the other thing that happens is the entitlement system, they throw crumbs to the poor and the rich get richer. And the housing bubble is a perfect example. First, the Fed creates a lot of credit and say, we're going to make the credit available through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and everybody's going to get a house. Oh, there's some people who don't qualify. Well, we'll lower the qualifications and we'll force you to make these loans. And then there are the mortgage companies and the building companies and the bankers, and they get involved and they see all this credit slushing around. They get involved in the derivatives market and they make billions and billions of dollars. It's very obvious a bubble is there, but they say, oh yeah, but look at what we're doing for the poor people. They all have houses and the price of the houses are going up and they keep borrowing against their equity. This is the golden age of permanent prosperity, until the obvious bubble bursts. And then what happens? Who comes crawling to the government? The people who've been making all the money. And then they get the bailout, and the middle class loses their jobs and they lose their house. The entitlement system doesn't work. What we need is have honesty with government, honesty with money, and honesty with allowing people to keep the fruits of their labor. The one thing about the whole concept of liberty and how freedom brings us together, I have said, and I absolutely believe it, I think freedom is popular. I think it's popular with everybody. And it is, once you understand this, it should bring us all together. no matter how we want to use our freedom. There's been too many in the nanny state business who says that, well, we can't trust everybody to spend their money the way they want. They might not do a good job. And we can't certainly allow you to practice personal social habits because you might do things, you might smoke or drink something we don't want you to. So we have to guide you to make you better people and make it a better economy. But if you understand liberty, if you understand that you have a right to your life and the fruits of your labor, this should bring us all together as long as we're not judgmental. Because if you legalize something, if you legalize personal behavior or religious beliefs or intellectual pursuits, that doesn't mean we for a minute endorse what people do. We generally recognize this in religious behavior. People can have different religious beliefs. We don't put people in jail for that. And also if people have no religious beliefs. So we sort of bring people together this way, but as soon as it comes to personal habits, as soon as it comes to spending your money, then we have these do-gooders. They're on both sides of the aisle. They're due back and forth, and the job that we have as promoters in this freedom movement is to bring people together, bring diverse people together and say it's in all our interest to defend liberty, and you get to decide how you want to use your liberty any way you want. Major precondition on using your liberty, you can do things that might harm yourself, but you can't do things that will harm your neighbor, and that's a big difference. But when it is assumed that the government is there to protect you against yourself and against your own decisions, that's when there's nothing left, and we're in that category right now. The government is so involved in everything that we do. That's why you have DEA agents coming and arresting people and throwing them in prison and forgetting about it. But that's just one episode. That is just happening all the time. This whole notion that these drug laws have to be enforced regardless. We have a couple hundred of these operations, these sting operations, these break-ins, these SWAT teams, 200 a day. And you can rest assured that it's not with proper search warrants and proper conditions, but the whole idea that they're going to make things better is the problem. But it's that violation that comes, and the founders were pretty astute about this. They didn't want a national police force, yet even before 9/11, over 100,000 U.S. bureaucrats carried guns. The bureaucrats had to carry guns to enforce all these laws. So I think our problem is that we just have too many laws. That's a problem. We have 5% of the population and 25% of the prisoners. So I would say, well, American people aren't any worse than the other country. I think we just have too many laws, and it's the repeal of laws that we have to do. We have to get rid of the laws. But the drug war has been going on for a good many years. Of course, in our early history, there were no drug laws, and then they tried with alcohol. Just think about the alcohol. They actually had enough respect in those times where they knew they had to amend the Constitution to prohibit something. Today, though, they don't even bother, so that's why our task is much greater, but we have to put this effort. But it is tied. It is all tied together. Individual liberty, personal economic liberty, as well as the foreign policy comes together as us defending and understanding why we as individuals are important. Now, we got off on a bad start in our early history. Obviously, the Constitution was a great document, but it was far from perfect because there was obviously the endorsement of slavery and a lot of penalties because you belong to certain groups, and that to a large degree has been rectified. But we should look at this as nobody should ever be penalized because they belong to a group, but they should never get any benefits because they belong to a group either. We should not, I would love to see the day when we don't have hyphenated Americans. One little pet peeve of mine occurs on election night. You know, immediately after the election occurred, there's always this analysis. They say, well, the Hispanics voted this way, the blacks voted this way, the Jewish people voted this way, the white Republicans voted this way. Why aren't we all individuals and not just part of a group? That's what we should be.